This is Hannibal from thehannibaltv.com, and I'm with Randy Hales, who's been involved in Memphis wrestling for decades. He's been an assistant to Jerry Jarrett. He started WWE's first developmental territory, Memphis Power Pro Wrestling. He's been an on-air personality, and he was very close friends with Jerry Jarrett's father-in-law, Eddie Marlin, who recently passed away. And from what I understand, you were visiting him in the hospital pretty much daily, and you were with him right to the end.
Yes, and I'll get to that in a minute. But people like excitement. They like adversary. They like arguing. We're not going to really argue, but I will say this, Hannibal. You hurt my feelings one time before. You hurt my feelings bad. Do you want to hear that story on how you hurt my feelings?
Yes, because I have no idea what that could be from.
Obviously, I'm ribbing on the square, but you hurt my feelings when you came to Memphis, Tennessee, and one of my closest friends in life you visited with, and for hours you recorded with the superstar, Bill Dundee. Did you call Randy Hales back then? No, you did not. Then later on, I was already living in Hendersonville at Eddie Marlin's, but you came up. Jerry Jarrett even asked me, he said, you want to come watch this interview? And I didn't want to watch that interview because I know how his memory is. Not a knock on Jerry, but I know that his story and my story would be different as far as dates and memories because I'm just flat out remember better than he. Again, not a knock on him. So that's two people. You did others. You did Sid Vicious on and on and on and on. But this is the first time. This is the first time that you call the owner, the founder, the president of Power Pro Wrestling. It's about time, but it's taken a death. It's taken a sad occasion to get me on here. But I'm tickled to death. Now, defend yourself about not checking me out when you were just 20 miles from me in Franklin, Tennessee. Defend yourself, Hannibal.
Well, I was actually in Memphis itself as well, but I was not the expert of Memphis wrestling that I am now. I'm still no expert, but I'm learning more and more and more. Obviously, I'm very familiar with who you are and your various Facebook and Twitter videos, your websites, your history. So when I come back to Memphis, which I'm sure I'm going to do sooner or later, I'll definitely have to hook up with you in person this time.
All
You
right,
also
Jerry.
ran Jerry Lawler's, not to cut you off, but Jerry Lawler's restaurant there for a while too, didn't you?
Right, I was the general manager for that for 3 years. Long time close friend, and Lawler is one of my favorite people in the wrestling business. So if you have any Jerry Lawler questions, I know you asked Jerry Jarrett in the interview. See, I learned these things quick. I learned these things quick because a friend of mine watched that you did with Jerry Jarrett, and so if you want to get later on and talk about the Brian Lawler situation, and I'll give you my thoughts on that as well. But I'm tickled to death to be here, ready to talk Memphis wrestling and ready to talk a little Eddie Marlin.
Well, let's start it off because we're based in Canada. We have a lot of United States subscribers. About 60% of our audience is from the US. But from people that are from Canada and don't exactly know some of your accomplishments, do you want to start off by telling us some of your accomplishments in the wrestling business?
Well, I think you did a pretty good job in that introduction, but I will go, I guess, with from day one story, and it involves Eddie Marlin. When I was about 10 years old, I got hooked on Memphis wrestling in my hometown, where I am right now, Jonesboro, Arkansas, 70 miles. We got studio wrestling from Memphis every Saturday. Now that was back in around 1971, 72. I was around 10 or 11 years old. And wrestling at the time was on Channel 13. At the time, the ABC affiliate, WHBQ television. It started, I'll do a little terrible singing for you. That was in the era of television where they started with jingles. And my first memory of Memphis wrestling was a jingle that said, "It's America's favorite sport on WHBQ television." Then, even back then, 1972, then you heard, "Hello again, everybody, Lance Russell and Dave Brown, right along ringside, ready to go with another Saturday morning of studio wrestling from Channel 13 in Memphis, Tennessee, 487 South Highland in Memphis, Tennessee. That's my first memories of wrestling. I started going to the matches with a friend of mine when I was about 11 years old, and his dad was the chairman of the American Legion Wrestling Committee that presented wrestling every Saturday night. My hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas, they did anywhere between 7 or 8 hundred people, 1,100 probably was the capacity. But my first job in the wrestling business at 10 or 11 years old was to sell Eddie Marlin's uh, pictures for 50 cents. This is the big money I made as a 10-year-old. I would get 5 cents, Hannibal, 5 cents a picture for any picture I would sell. That was my first job. It turned in to I would go up and get the ring jackets. Then at 13 years old, freshman or maybe 14, I was a freshman in high school. I started ring announcing. I started writing a program during a time period in probably 77 or no, 78, 79 sort of thing. It evolved. I started promoting spot shows. I got in the office in 86. I was hired by Jerry Lawler when it was his year to book the territory, and he needed somebody to move to Memphis and run the office and be his assistant. So that was 86. Jarrett took over in 87. I moved to Hendersonville and was his assistant, became an assistant general manager of the company, and it just evolved from there. I took a little leave of absence in 89 because I was mad at somebody, came back in 93, and I ran the company to early 97 when it was sold. I didn't like what was going on, so I got out. I quit the same TV Dave Brown quit. We missed the first TV we missed, we both missed, and then that show was canceled. The territory was done, and I went to Channel 5 because for several years I had produced and it was today's term, I was the booker, but in today's term, the writer, the producer of the show, and they liked me, never had issues. They did after I left, and so it was real easy for me to get my show that I named Power Pro Wrestling. I was the owner, founder, president, producer, booker, and I put out window cards, did everything. And as
The
you
Rock
said,
was on that, right? The Rock was part of Power Pro Wrestling.
no, he was
No.
not. The Rock was a part of an unofficial relationship that we had. I booked The Rock in 1996 as Flex Cavana. That's not my name. That's Vince McMahon's name because I wanted to do stuff, angles involving him getting the crap beat out of him. Then his dad would come in, make the save, and we do a tag match. But Vince McMahon in 1996 did not want to acknowledge his family history. That obviously changed with Rocky Maivia and everything that came after that. But yeah, now Power Pro Wrestling, and you need to check this out. And everybody that's never heard of Power Pro Wrestling, that was NXT before there was the NXT, it's Randy Hales, MemphisWrestling.com. But Kurt Angle's first full-time wrestling job, Power Pro Wrestling. Kurt Angle's very first TV appearance. And a trivia note, he wrestled against the Yellow Jacket. And the Yellow Jacket, you know who that is, Hannibal?
No idea.
His name's Kevin Lawler, the youngest son of Jerry Lawler.
Okay.
Kurt Angle won his first pro wrestling championship in, I guess this was probably May or June of 1999, and he defeated J.R. Smooth in a television match, and it was live studio wrestling. Now, do you know who J.R. Smooth is?
Yeah, isn't he one of PG-13?
No, J.R. Smooth later became Rikishi.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I told you I'd teach you a lot of
There
stuff
you
here,
go.
man. If you want Memphis wrestling information, you got
Yeah.
it here.
Wow.
You've had the rest, now you've got the best as far as Memphis wrestling history.
Well, one guy I do know that was in Power Pro who I've interviewed and he's wrestled for our company in Canada is Carl Willett, who's had a huge comeback now. He's now known as PCO. I don't know what name he was under in Memphis, but I think it was a different name, wasn't it?
Chris Cannonball. He
Oh,
wasn't here long. He was a part of that developmental program. Obviously, he's having a great career now, and it's amazing at his age, because it's a young man's business. But with him, he's doing the best work of his career. I always liked him. He was a great guy and a tough guy. I like great guys. I like tough guys. I like great women and tough women as well. And I don't want to be sexist at all in this, but obviously, we had some great lady wrestlers. One of my favorite of all times, as WWE Hall of Famer Jackie Moore, who was Miss Texas here, tough son of a gun, and she got over in the Memphis territory more than any lady wrestler I've ever seen in my life. She was in the top two or three baby faces in the entire territory, and that's in the territory with Jeff Jarrett, with Jerry Lawler, with Brian Christopher, with Bill Dundee. She was over. I even did a little hill deal. I even had somebody no-showed that she was supposed to work with, so I put her against me when I was doing the evil promoter stuff. And man, I can tell you one thing, she was stiff as hell. She about knocked my, you know what, stiff. She was a tough son of a gun.
Which of the towns in that territory was the best for the groupies? Because we always hear Memphis had the best groupies in all of wrestling.
Well, I would probably say in different eras. In the 80s, when the fabulous ones were so high, and the rock and roll and Terry Taylor and Dundee, Lawler was here and all that, had a unbelievable. Look it up sometimes, some of those cards from 1983. And we had so many young teenage to older college age girls, and even 30-year-old women. Memphis was great there, but in the later years, I would have to say that Louisville, because it was the one town that most of the talent that would stay over in Louisville, and so that was a pretty uh, good town for the young ladies to be around, and that was a lot of fun days in Louisville for a lot of different reasons. I like the venue, and I felt that I got a better reception, and not that I didn't in Memphis, but I like Louisville. My favorite thing to do is Memphis TV. My second favorite thing to do was Louisville Gardens on Tuesday night on Muhammad Ali Boulevard in Louisville, Kentucky. I love those days.
How are the indies doing in Memphis now? Because I know Jerry Jarrett doesn't really follow it, but I'm sure you have a better idea of what the independents are doing around these days.
Yeah, there's a lot of them. There's a ton of them, but I would say that maybe average crowd would be 60 or 70 people. I've seen them with 10 to 20. I've seen it real bad. Every once in a while when they bring in some names. Burt Prentice runs USA Wrestling. I've never been a Burt Prentice fan, but I will admit to everybody, I think he produces a TV, and I've seen some of that, and I haven't gone to his shows, but I think he does pretty good, especially regular shows in Jackson, Tennessee. He does real good there. And so I would recommend people checking that out for sure, even though, again, not my favorite person in the world, but he's doing good as what it does. But for the most part, in the Nashville area and the Louisville, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, but basically, there's shows that range from fair to real bad, and to quote my buddy Jim Cornette. Cornette, by the way, I like saying this. Cornette's a couple of months older than me. I can't say that about a lot of people that I deal with in wrestling now, but he's a couple of months older. But Cornette trashes the outlaw mud show stuff and all that stuff, and I 110% agree with that. However, some independent people, the problem with Hannibal, and in between gigs before, I booked smaller shows, and just the kids today, they used to it being the inmates are running the asylum, where I'll tell you a funny story. This town was doing about 75, 80 people, and I booked it for a couple of months and got it up to 250 to 300 with not good time, except for Bill Dundee, not known talent. But this is how, and it's not their fault. It's not the young people's fault. And just the inside information, I give a finish. Remember, I've given finishes to Kurt Angle, Jerry Lawler, Jeff Jarrett, Handsome Jimmy Valiant, Daniel Bryan, and I can go on and on and on and on and on. Never had a problem with a finish, ever, never. So I give this kid a finish, and he's probably an 18-year-old kid. I give him a finish, and it was an old finish, and so I give him the finish, and he tells me, he says, "That's stupid." He tells me my finish is stupid. A finish that a variation of a finish that used to draw money, but they don't do it to draw money. They don't get that concept. And I was trying to build. I knew what I was going to do with him the next week, the next week, the next week. I was beating him that week because the guy that he was working with that needed to go over, because I was bringing somebody in from another promotion to have a title versus title match. Knew what I was doing, and it was a fluky finish. He says it was stupid, and I said, "Okay, you don't have to do it." So he smiled, and he thought what he had always got his way when he complained about his finish. So I said, "You don't have to do the finish." He said, "Okay, I'll get a finish and I'll go tell my opponent." And I said, "Well, you don't have to do that." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because I'm taking you off the card. I don't need you tonight." And he said, "You're ribbon." He said, the people want to see me." I said, "Well, I don't think they'll lose too much sleep over it." I said, "Get your not profanity." Heck, he was a little bit scrawny guy. I'm not the biggest guy in the world. I just had the door. But again, and I don't even remember the guy's name. But here's the thing, and why I bring it up about independence: it's not their fault. They go to these independent shows, especially in the South, and maybe in Canada it's different. I know up north it's different, but it's not organized. So these kids who have not been taught the business have been certainly not taught the booking part, because you have to learn this. I learned from Bill Dundee, from Jerry Jarrett, from Jerry Lawler, from being around, being in booking meetings, just listening. These people think they know by watching Raw or watching whatever. They think they know when they don't. And I set the tone that first day that I took over, is that if you're not going to do what I say, not that I won't take input, I will. But if I tell you something, you say no, you're not going to work. Bottom line. That's how. And he, I think, learned of great value. And then Bill Dundee heard me hollering and cussing, and so he came thinking I'm in trouble. He came to make the save, and then Bill cussed him out, and then about an hour later, one of the boys came back in to the thing and said, "Randy," he said, "what's his name?" And I can't think of the dude's name, but he said, "Randy, you won't believe this." I said, "What?" He said, "The guy's still in his car in the parking lot, and he's crying like a baby." Well, he and I didn't do it to be mean. As a matter of fact, he learned a great lesson about the wrestling business. It's one thing dealing with a promoter that's just doing it for fun or whatever. Everything I do is for the good of the business and for the good of my pocketbook to draw money. And so he learned a lesson, is when you're dealing with experienced people that's had success in a territory or in a business, you better respect him or you're not going to work. And I think, even though it might seem like I was mean to, I tell you what you would have done to him. You seem like a hot-headed guy to me. I've seen some of those videos. If you'd have been beside me there and you'd have been a friend of mine, you might have punched him in the nose. What do you think?
I actually probably never had an issue with people I've given finishes to for that reason.
Right.
But you brought up Bill Dundee, and you've been talking about you're a Memphis wrestling expert. What's your version of the Bill Dundee Macho Man Randy Savage gun incident that everyone still talks about today?
Well, there is only one person still alive that I've heard that version from. I know Jerry Jarrett, apparently, I've heard has a Randy Savage version of that story, that I've never heard. So I can just tell you what Bill Dundee has told me. I can just tell you also, I've known Bill Dundee since I was a kid, since 1975, January 75, when he came in this territory with George Barnes. I can tell you in all those times, Bill and I traveled hundreds of thousands, maybe 1,000,000 miles together. Are you dipping or are you drinking there?
Drinking coffee. I'm going to the gym after this. I got to get
Oh,
caffeinated up.
I'm thinking about dipping, but I do have some ice. I have some iced tea right here. But anyway, so I can tell you what Bill Dundee says. Some fan uh, made Bill Dundee some wrestling ties. They said Macho Man on it. Obviously, Randy Savage and his dad and ICW was running opposition. They would pay more attention to us than they would. Maybe they would have lasted longer if they would have paid attention to themselves. But they would do challenges in the newspaper. I challenged Jerry Jarrett. I challenged Bill, knowing they weren't coming. They were booked somewhere else. But anyway, so Bill got these tights and he wore them on TV, and that made Randy Savage mad. And he called Dundee, and Dundee said, cussed him, and said, explained the situation. That has nothing to do with you, and our fans that watch our TV never heard of you and never heard of ICW. F off, basically, is what happened. So later on, Bill was at a gym, and I'm sure it's the same story he told you. And again, I'm telling his side of the story because that's the only side of the story I've heard. Again, Dundee has never lied to me. He was at a gym. He's still in the office. He has to leave to go to the office. He comes out, and Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo and Thunderbolt Patterson and a bunch of if I didn't say Angelo was there. So the big confrontation, and Bill was by himself, and there was about 6 of them out there. And so it ended up where Savage nailed Dundee. It didn't break his jaw, but screwed up his jaw. And so with 6 people there, Dundee's thinking in his mind, I'll use his exact words, that if I can get to that car, I can restore order real quickly. And so he got to the car. Back then, you can just pop it. You had to turn the key, open the briefcase, got the gun, and then Randy jumped on his back. But here comes Angelo. He posts the name, "Get off me, or I'll kill you. I'll kill your effing dad." And so then the follow up on that is obviously Dundee was assaulted, and they were afraid that he would file charges. They filed charges first. They ended up going to court, and basically Saul Weingroff, the old manager and friends of the Poffos, came to Dundee and Eddie Marlin, who was with him. Again, Eddie Marlin, which was basically not a shooter, but the tough guy of the territory, would fight anybody. He went with Dundee to the courthouse, and Saul came up and said, "Hey, this needs to go Broadway," which means no contest. That they throw it out. And Dundee said, I don't know. And then he called Jerry Jarrett, who said, "Hey, we don't want this whole mess out on the news and different things. It's best just to go Broadway and be over with." Dundee missed several weeks or a month or 2. I don't even remember. And back to normal. And then later on, when Dundee had gone to book for the satellite territory in Georgia, I believe, or maybe it was when he was about to leave for Louisiana. I don't really remember, but Bill Watts brokered a deal to get was the first contact. Lanny was working for him, so he called Jerry Jarrett, and Jarrett and Lawler talked. They knew Dundee had bad feelings, but they knew he was leaving. So basically, Randy Savage came in here. Now, obviously, I'm going to believe Dundee's side, but I can tell you my experiences of Randy Savage was tremendous. I mean, he was the most professional. He even worked himself into, he was a assistant booker. I believe it was for Lawler and not Jerry Jarrett. But Randy Savage was professional, great worker, got over, drew money.
Now, Dutch Mantell told us Dutch's version of the Waffle House knife story from Nashville. What did you hear about that? Was it really just a butter knife that Macho Man had pulled that led to the cops being called, or was it an actual steak knife?
Well, I've got to pass on that, Hannibal, and I'll tell you why. Remember at the time what was going on at the time. Jerry Jarrett split off from Nick Gulas in 1977. Nick still ran the Nashville end, and over on the Memphis end, and Louisville and Evansville and Lexington, Jarrett had that. Well, when that incident took place with Randy Savage in the Waffle House, and I probably heard Dutch tell this story, but Randy was working for Nick Goulas, not Jerry Jarrett. So I have no, in of that era, Randy Savage, I didn't know at all.
And I'm sure you've heard the story about what Lanny Poffo used to do in the dressing rooms to kind of, his special talent there. I don't really want to get into it, but
And
his
I can say this, neither do I want to get into it
yeah.
whatsoever. However, I will say I've heard the stories, but never, never, ever, ever, ever saw him do that. And just like his brother and just like his father, Lanny was great. He got over, hell of a worker. There's one match I still remember calling today. Lance was out of town, Mid-South Coliseum. Little history here. There's a Rock and Roll Express just came back from Louisiana, Mid-South Wrestling Bill Watts, and it was a Rock and Roll Express against Randy Savage, Lanny Poffo. I was doing play-by-play. You need to check that out, listen to that, because to my knowledge, that was the very first time, two things. Very first time I remember a table ever broken, big smods, they roll out. Randy throws Ricky on the table, go for the pile butt driver. I'm doing commentating, and I'm saying, obviously, I didn't know what was going to happen next because they didn't. That wasn't a spot. Just for the moment, they decided to do it. Savage goes for the pile driver. Probably all Lawler told them, said, we need to heat after the match, disqualification heat after the match. So they go to the table, goes to pick him up, and goes to pile driver him, and the pile driver ends up at this point breaking the table. And at this point, I think maybe the first a bump into the table, the first time that ever happened. So that's the first number one. My commentary, if you're an ECW fan, I jumped the gun on Joey Styles because when they go for this funny story, I say, oh my God, he broke the table. Then I'm thinking, this is 1984 in the Bible Belt, and I just said, oh my God. So then I correct myself, and I come across as the biggest geek in the history of the world, but I say, oh my God. Then I says, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And I beat myself up anytime I listen to that. But if anybody wants to go to YouTube and watch that, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's a heck of a match.
I'll check that one out. And the reason I was asking you about Lanny doing that was because Sid told me a story that Virgil tried that in the dressing room in Memphis and he got fired over doing that. So I was just wondering if you heard there was any truth to Virgil doing that in the dressing room and getting fired.
Well, no, I can't confirm that he actually got immediately fired. The person that gave him a notice, because he wasn't with it and he was not very good and he was a goof. The person that gave him a 2 weeks notice, if memory serves me correct, is me. I'm the one that told him you're gone in 2 weeks. I'm the one went in the dressing room and he was doing that incident to get over with the boys. How anybody would think that would get over with the boys, but he was just trying to rib and be. I'm not defending it at all, but I remember I've shoot out a lot of wrestlers or got on disciplined a lot of wrestlers, but never about this. But yes, he was doing that solo to himself on the. It was not any. I want to make this clear. It's not like there was teenage girls or anything else. It was not something anybody wanted to see. But he wasn't harming anybody except I don't think I've ever got over that yet. And he was fussed at big time. And then the decision was made to get rid of him, and we did that pretty quickly. But he wasn't fired on the spot.
I see. And back to Eddie Marlin, you brought him up a few times in this. Obviously, he was a very important figure in Memphis wrestling. When did you start to become really close with him, more than a working relationship?
Well, just years ago, because I had a father, and my father died in 1981. I was a freshman in college. From that point on, it's like Eddie made sure that he was the one that would, even though we lived 300 miles apart, would give me fatherly advice. So for years and years and years on the road, Eddie just normally went to the spot shows he promoted in Memphis and TV. So he wasn't on the road at that point as much as me. But for Memphis, normally would travel with him and his son-in-law Randy West, sometimes Jerry Jarrett, and didn't like that because that was just getting into the office, and a young man wanted to be more one of the boys and do the things that come with that, the drinking and the Fernum Durnum and everything we did back then. So I loved Eddie to death, but it was like I was punished because I didn't get to have fun on the road like I would have had. Now, if I had sense back then that I have sense now, I was certainly would have thought, well, this is much more valuable than getting drunk or high. And I didn't think that at the time. But anyway, that's gone. And Eddie's out, and I've always had a great relationship. But then I was at Jerry Lawler's Hall of Fame Bar and Grill. It's the bar life. I don't know if you've ever worked bar life, but it can be consuming and stressful and that sort of thing. And plus, Bill Street in Memphis, especially on the weekends, pretty dangerous. And I'm too darn old to roll around on the sidewalk breaking up fights. And I had to do that on a fairly regular basis. Just tired of the lifestyle. And I posted on Facebook. I have to give Jerry Jarrett credit for this. He says, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm in a good shape money-wise. I said, I'm just going to find something. He said, you need to come here. Eddie needs you. Eddie Marlin had lost his wife in 2014, his wife of 65 years. He was the best husband I've ever seen in my life. She had been sick for 15 years. He set up a hospital bed in the den. He would pull his recliner next, and she went to sleep every night with him holding her hand. Great husband. Lost Norma. He developed advanced COPD, had trouble breathing. Jerry Jarrett said, you need to come. Eddie needs you. Long-standing thing on Memphis TV, Lance Russell used to say when it got us smiles in a wild brawl and we're getting heat on somebody, Lance Russell used to say, Eddie Marlin, we need some heat. We need some help out here. And here came the one-man cavalry of Eddie Marlin and type of thing. Well, I was kind of being called in, and Jerry had this idea. And he said, man, you just left a restaurant. There's a ton of restaurants here in this town, this market, Nashville is hot, and you can get a good job here, and Eddie will be glad to see you. So I was thinking, go there, get a job, get my own place, that sort of thing. I didn't know how bad Eddie was with this advanced COPD, and it thrilled him to death. And I had some interviews, but I'm thinking, this is more important than getting a job. So I put my life on hold for a year is basically what I did. And everything was going good. He was 88 years old, living at home. Then he got sick. I called 911 on June the 11th on a Wednesday. And he went back and forth from a regular room to critical care unit, then got dismissed and went to the rehab place so they can get him stronger, back to the hospital, back to CCU, on and off. And then his wife had passed away in a dialysis clinic, and he always said he wouldn't have dialysis, but the last maybe month or so, roughly less than a month, he was getting dialysis and didn't really like doing it. But at the end, he was just tired of it. He was ready to quit fighting, go back to go to heaven with Norma, and I have no doubt that he's there. So he told him no more dialysis. And I believe that was on a Sunday. On a Tuesday, his 89th birthday, the decision was made. Jerry Jarrett was in that meeting, Jerry's wife and Eddie's daughter, Deborah, and me. They were real cool to involve me on everything. And the decision was made that he would go into hospice at the hospital. And then, so that was on a Tuesday, that Tuesday night. I spent the night with Eddie at the hospital along with his grandson, Jason. The next day, I stayed all day long, and Jason relieved me, and I was going to have to relieve him at 6:45 the next morning. But at 5 o'clock in the morning, Jason had called, and Eddie had quietly and peacefully passed away. So I just can't tell you more, Hannibal, that how much of he was a great man, a great wrestling business guy, had so many friends. He's a great husband, a great family man, a great church member. He was just, there's not a lot of perfect people, and I'm certainly not one of them, nowhere close. There's not a lot of perfect people that I've met in the wrestling business. As close as I've ever met is Eddie Marlin. It's been devastating. Enjoyed the last year, wouldn't trade it for anything. This past Wednesday, a week ago tomorrow, I think you said this is going to drop on a Wednesday. So a week ago, I decided I've done what I was here to do. So I'm back in my hometown of Jonesboro, Arkansas. And at 57 years old, I'm starting over. So that's basically what's going on there. On my Facebook, Randy Hales, it's facebook.com/randy.hales/.79, my Facebook. I'd appreciate anybody checking me out on that. You can go back in the archive. I've done a couple of video tributes and a spoken tribute to Eddie Marlin. A lot more detail than we can do here, Hannibal. But I did a video tribute. It wasn't this past Sunday night, but the Sunday before. So that would have been what, the 19th? I'm not even sure on the dates, but on a Sunday, and we show back some matches that Eddie had in '73. One match in '74. This is the match that you can find on the Randy Hales Facebook page. This is the match: Eddie Marlin, Tommy Gilbert, and Ricky Gibson again, Jerry Lawler, and one of the iconic former NWA World Champions of all time, Lou Thesz. So we play some cool stuff from Eddie as wrestler Eddie Marlin. We play some cool stuff when he in a feud with Tommy Gilbert when he was 57. Some promoter stuff when he was in the role of promoter Eddie Marlin, the on-air person for Memphis Wrestling. He was an on-screen authority figure. And we placed one cool thing where he saved me from Bob Armstrong. We did a lot of good, cool stuff. So Randy Hale's Facebook page, check that out. Because his wrestling career, he wasn't a top guy, but it was usually the semifinal position in a tag team with either Tojo Yamamoto or Tommy Gilbert. He drew a lot of money.
And the last question I'll ask you is, it was all in the news, I think last month, that Jerry Lawler had filed a lawsuit in relation to the wrongful death of Brian Christopher. But it seemed in that lawsuit that they've come to terms that it was a suicide, where when it originally happened, there was some belief that there was foul play involved. Do you have any idea of what point Mr. Lawler kind of accepted that it was a suicide?
And I don't know one way or another if he has. I really don't know, and I can tell you of the people in the wrestling business. And I'll tell you the people that I feel I'm closest to. Bill Dundee, I've already mentioned. Eddie Marlin has passed away, and then Jerry Lawler. And I love Brian Christopher Lawler, loved him to death. And when you lose your son, and obviously I think there's guilt. And to be honest with you, I was one of the ones that I was talking, and I did everything I could help Brian as well. He got in an incident in Memphis a few weeks before that, and I went and picked him up at where he was, and I loved Brian. Now, everybody agreed at the time is that there, at a point that we were dead wrong, deathly wrong. We felt that Brian needed help, and he needed to help get over his demons. And Lawler bailing him out, which he could have easily done, absolutely financially. But everybody, I think, and it was a Lawler decision, but got input from different people, including me, who all felt that, Hannibal, you would think when you're in jail and when the sheriff is telling you, said he needs help and we'll get him help. I'll treat him like I treat him, would treat my own son Lawler. 110% felt he wasn't punishing Brian or wasn't trying to save the money or anything like that. He thought this was a step that might be a stern test to do, but he felt that Brian, if he got out on the bail, that wouldn't fix the problem, type of thing. And then you would assume would have been protected in that jail. Just read the story. Why did he was in a cell where he could do that? Why was he not being monitored? Why or follow this story? But I'm telling you, I understand if it was my son or my family member that I would want somebody to be able to help. And obviously, Brian's son Blake, Lawler's not trying to make a big payoff here whatsoever. It's just a thing, and I think I read a lot of places justice for Brian, and I think Brian didn't get justice. Brian, even though I mean I don't even know if you met Brian. Brian had he had conflicts with many people, but at the same time, what's not told, Brian, I've seen he was the most kind-hearted, helpful person. He cared about other human beings. I loved Brian Christopher to death. And when I got a call on a Saturday night at the Bar and Grill from Kevin Lawler, his brother, saying what was going on, and I called Lawler, who was in the Carolinas, and told him about 1 o'clock in the morning when I closed the bar, and Lawler had to fly in. He didn't get there till midnight the other day, and I stayed the whole time. And as a matter of fact, the next afternoon, I was in the room along with the family and Jerry Lawler when close to the time that Brian had passed away. So this was so impactful and so sad to my life. I love Brian, and certainly I love Jerry Lawler as much as I do anybody I've ever met in my life. He's always been straight up, always took care of me, and knows I've always been a Jerry Lawler guy, and he's always been a Randy Hales guy. And I've talked this most recent move that I made leaving Hendersonville to come here. One of the first people I talked to was Jerry Lawler, not asking for a job, not asking for money, just asking, do you think this is the right step? What do you think? And obviously he said, yes, you need to be home close to your family. But anyway, just a bad situation. So I'm not giving you any late breaking news, but I can vouch from the person I first met, Brian, when he was 10 years old. 10 years old. So I knew him from the first of his career, and even though his dad was the owner of the company, a 50% owner, as the booker, never one single time did he wasn't like that kid I told you about earlier in this show, Hannibal, that refused to finish. No, Brian would never go his dad over my head. If he had a suggestion, he wouldn't go to his dad. He would go to me. He couldn't have been great. And I love Brian Christopher.
Is Jamie Dundee getting along better with Bill these days?
As far as I know, that's a negative. No. As far as I know, and I hadn't asked that question to Bill lately, and Jamie I haven't talked to in several years. When they were still speaking, Bill and I went to see Jamie in Evansville, Indiana. This was I'm thinking 5 years ago, something like that. And that's the last I've heard of Jamie. Jamie's a heck of a talent, controversial. I wouldn't trust him to be on any of my live Facebooks or live Twitters. No telling what that goofy son of a gun will say. I'd be scared to death to have him on something that I couldn't edit. But he and Whoopi D of PG-13. So it was Whoopi D, JC Ice, PG-13. We had that Smoky Mountain USWA run that drew more money in this territory than anything had drawn in maybe 7 or 8 years. It was a good program. But PG-13 were considered Randy's guys, and they were being used as middle of the card underneath guys. Then Jerry Jarrett took the job in New York, and then Jeff Jarrett took the job in New York, and Lawler was here less than he had been in 30 years. And I needed to create baby faces to draw money, and I pushed PG heavy as main event type of talent, and I switched Brian Christopher babyface and went heavy duty with him, and we had a good run there until the Monday Night Wars got us in '95 because we were doing good and the other towns held up, but man, we fell off in Memphis, and I still still keeps me awake at night thinking about those towns when you have a heck of a house in Louisville on a Tuesday night, but the day before you're ready to jump off the bridge because Memphis did so bad. But then by Tuesday night, and you have a packed house or a good house, a great house, then you think, well, I must be not doing something terribly wrong if this town's drawing. It was just the circumstances in the biggest boom period in history in professional television history and an event being against us for free. How were we going to compete with that, compete with the Goldberg Hulk Hogan match or an Austin Rock match when we were going with, say, a Jerry Lawler main event with not a real strong opponent or a PG Rock and Roll, something that we had done real good with for 4 months, but they'd sent it. It's just a bad time in the wrestling business, in the Memphis wrestling business, and it just was what it was. Hannibal, I feel I've talked so much about Eddie Marlin. Do you have any more questions on him, his role as a wrestler or a promoter?
I guess the last thing I want to ask you about Eddie was, what were some of the most important things he taught you about the behind the scenes workings of the business that you used successfully?
I can tell you ones that I use successful today, and I harp at everybody about this, including I try to teach this lesson to my co-host of my podcast. I have a podcast out there, Memphis Memories, by the way, with Randy Hales. But anyway, I try to teach this thing, and it was not just a Eddie thing, but basically he always said, when you're booked, you make the booking. And I've always done that because the traumatic thing in my life with Eddie passing away, I still had my podcast. Might have been a day or two late, but I had my podcast. The first time Eddie went to the hospital, he was in CU. Jerry Jarrett and Deborah came. I said, I'll be back in about 2 hours. I went home and did the podcast. Why? Because Eddie Marlin taught me to protect, to make your bookings. Make your bookings always. Also, Eddie told me, and this is a different world, and it took a while for him to get this. So he didn't understand when I moved in last September 20th of 2018, and I started doing a podcast and all this kind of stuff. And I even interviewed him for the podcast. But he always taught me, Hannibal, to protect the business at all cost, even if it's take a bullet for the business, take a knife for the business, protect the business. And so he got mad at me when he would overhear me doing my podcast and I'm talking inside wrestling. And he said, what in the world are you doing? And I had to play a Jerry Jarrett podcast and say, this is what Jerry's doing. I can't believe Jerry's doing this, smarting people up. Playing Jerry Lawler, playing Jim Cornette's, playing Steve Austin's. And so
they're all out of the business now, though. That's the thing. If you guys were still in the business, you could be hurting your own booking, but you're not promoting anymore.
No, and guys in the business, you don't think Chris Jericho says inside stuff about the wrestling business, and he's making more money than he ever did in his life?
That's true.
The toothpaste is out of the tube, Hannibal. I mean, we just ended up throwing in the towel. We gave up, that sort of thing. If I book somewhere today, I would still do my podcast. However, I think a big part of my booking style is people need to expect the unexpected. And certainly I wouldn't go on your show or my podcast and say, well, my first segment coming up Saturday on my live Memphis Wrestling, I'm going to start with Bill Dundee out there, and I'm going to have him say a line against Lawler, and Lawler is going to sneak around behind the curtains, and he's going to come out of the curtains. We've done this 100 times, and glom him from behind, get some heat, get some juice, whatever. I'm not going to do that if I was currently in wrestling. But then I, at the same time, will still not come out and try to sell the wrestling business. I'll take back everything I've said about the wrestling business, and I wouldn't try to treat it like a shoot, type of thing. It's different times, it's different world, social media and everything else. Did I like it better then? Yes, I do. But at the same time, I'm one of the very few old time wrestling people. I love a lot of current wrestling. I love New Japan. I love WWE stuff. I like the Ricochet Drew McIntyre match last night. I'm going to get AEW Saturday. Is there some stuff that all these groups do I don't like? Absolutely. But there was some stuff I booked myself I didn't like either. Let's face it. We didn't sell out every night. We didn't. We had bombs. We had bad ideas. I think people forget that. But I think for that time, the best wrestling in the country, I absolutely 100% say Memphis Wrestling was the best territory there was. It was the most exciting, expect the unexpected, most unpredictable, most creative, best television show, anything. And for those other people out there, and there was a debate on Twitter recently that said, other promoters thought it wasn't serious wrestling. It was all comedy. Well, that's a bunch of crap. That's not true. Did we have comedy stuff from time to time? Yes. But tell me, do you think Terry Funk and Jerry Lawler in an empty Coliseum match was comedy? No. Do you think the Moondogs against whoever was comedy? Do you think the Tupelo concession stand brawl with Wayne Ferris and Larry Latham against Gary Lawler and Bill Dundee was comedy? No. The people believed it. If the people didn't believe it, if they thought it was funny, if they thought it was ha ha, I'm telling you, we wouldn't have had all the riots we had. We wouldn't have drawn all the serious money we had. So I love wrestling today, but when you start talking about the good old days and old time wrestling, don't pick on Memphis Wrestling. Don't say it was BS. Don't say it was all comedy, or you'll get the type of promo. I hadn't done a promo like this in a long time. You'll get a promo like this.
Well, the one thing I found strange about AEW is now that Jon Moxley has dropped out, their main match is Cody Rhodes against Shawn Spears this weekend, and that match is based around a chair shot that Tony Khan has said publicly was an accident. So they're definitely going a breaking kayfabe way about angles. It's unusual.
It is unusual, but, how many people saw Khan's interview, and I read that, and obviously old-time wrestling guy, I'm thinking, man, I'd have got shot if I did that back in the day, but it's a different time. Would I have done it now? Absolutely not. However, how many people saw that interview compared to the people that watched that pay-per-view and watched that angle? And honestly, I've never met Cody Rhodes in my life, but the stuff he's done from All In and his match with the NWA champion, the best thing on the show, was that, and what was that called?
Double or Nothing, maybe.
Double, All In. I think All In was the first thing in Chicago. Double or Nothing was the deal. The best match on the card, not only the best match on the card, the best match I've seen in years, the most emotional, and that whole build-up with him and Dustin. And the people chanting, Dusty, Dusty, Dusty. So I have faith in everything he does, and that chair shot thing that went bad, hell, I'm glad it did go bad. It's a wrestler, for Christ's sakes. If you stitches, it's part of it. It's part of this business. It's not ballet at all. So I love the Cody road stuff, and I did not. You're telling me something I didn't know. I didn't know that will be the main event, but expect a major. This is just my prediction as somebody that's booked a lot of territory wrestling in Memphis. And my prediction is they're going. I don't know what it is, but they're going to shoot a major angle to end that show. I don't know to bring in Arn Anderson to on the other side of Tully or Magnum. I don't know what they're going to do, but I think it will be a angle because I see that Cody has Dusty Rhodes all over him as far as creatively, as far as the personality. I think and again, I've never met him before in my life and just met Dusty twice. So it's not like people I have personal relationships with. I just like great wrestling. And the type of wrestling he's doing, I like. No doubt about it. So yeah, I'm excited about wrestling today. I'm excited about AEW. I'm excited about NXT being on USA. I'm excited about TNT having wrestling for the first time since what, 2000, 2001, something like that. I'm excited about the WWE because I know how Vince is when he has competition. I know
Oh
how
yeah,
he is,
make it
and
more interesting.
and and I enjoyed New Japan. Just a lot of good stuff going on. I'm kind of on the outside looking in, but with a vested interest in wrestlers doing good, and really enjoy seeing what the business is now, and to see how it goes. And a quick story: I used to hear old time guys talk about Rock and Roll Express and Bobby Eaton being spot monkeys. They were horrible. Now, how horrible, how bad does that sound now? That
Yeah.
Bobby Eaton and Rock and Roll were spot monkeys and wasn't very good. Ridiculous. So I think a lot of people that's knocking wrestling today in 10, 15, 20 years, the people that do knocking will be proven wrong. I really do. Now, there is bad wrestling out there. The Outlaw Mud shows, to quote Cornette. Cornette and I had a long talk last week about that, and I have just as much ill feelings about the extreme crap that he does. But Young Buck fan, Kenny Omega fan, Cody Rhodes fan, Chris Jericho fan, want everybody to do good because we want the wrestling business to be healthy and we want another boom period. Because if there's all kinds of people watching wrestling, if all kind of people want to know about the history, where do you think they'll go? They might understand that NXT before it was NXT was Power Pro Wrestling. Here's my plug. I'm still a wrestling promoter, brother. Still a wrestling promoter. So I want everybody to go out and I want you to go to Randy Hales. That's Hales. MemphisWrestling.com. A lot of the Jim Cornette collection, the beginning collection, the complete collection of 37 DVDs, 154 shows. Randy Hales, MemphisWrestling.com.
I'll cut it at that because that was a good way to end it.
All right. That was fun.
Yeah, you got some good stories in. I'll say I
Yeah.
could have asked you about Jim Cornette there, but I don't want to make it too long. I'd rather have more people watch it and then tune in again maybe in the future.
How long did we go?
59 minutes.